Hey everybody. So it is Monday, 9 o'clock Central. Getting used to this Central Time thing. Um, by the way, let me every time I start one of these videos, you have to put in the description, and I put in like a bunch of these hashtag type tags references. But I've heard that at least with Twitter, they don't follow the hashtags anymore, and it's like totally pointless to put hashtags in. So for those of you in the know, is it pointless to put hashtags in at this point, or do they just rely on AI to just sort of figure out what people are into? Because it would save me a bunch of time coming up with these stupid hashtags. Okay, so moving on. So this is going to be a reaction video to a comment I got from last night's video about Conclave and all the SJs stuff going on in Conclave. And the comment, it's one of these, like, of course you expect it anytime you have one of these MBTI/personality channels, you're going to get the people who come along and, say, I really don't think you're an INFJ. I think you're more of a this or you're more of a that. And I get it. And that's all part of the fun. And I can't say that I'm not guilty of doing that. I try not to, but I can't say that I'm not guilty of doing it. And I mean, in general, usually it's just sort of a snarky, you're not a blah, 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 you're a blah, blah, blah. They move on. And those usually aren't cool. But, if you're funny about it, like type police or something like that, then, sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it's cool. But this particular commenter, I think they were making the comment in good faith and laid out, their argument for, are you really this type? And, they weren't being like, weird or aggressive about it. So I figured I'd, in good faith, give a response because it does raise a couple of good points that I would address and talk about that I've talked about in other videos, but I think is worth sort of re-mentioning or reiterating or getting into again. Um, so okay, so you could go to my conclave video and you'll see the comment. My video from last night. It's pretty long, so I'm not going to read all the way through it, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I'm going to do it like and try to do it in good faith and not put words into their mouth. So that I can angle the argument in my favor or anything. Um, so I think the first thing that's probably, to me, I think the most important thing worth mentioning is their argument seems to be they don't really think I'm a. They disagree with my typing of being an INFJ because they think I'm more NE than NI. I'm more on the SINE type of access than I am on the NISE type of access, at least according to their observation. Um, and I would say, that's a reasonable charge. That's a reasonable observation because in my videos, what I'm doing is purely NE stuff by and large, right? And I've made this comment before, or sort of this point before, that it's hard to type people when they're doing things that are sort of outside of what you would think they would do as a type, right? So if you've got somebody who doesn't have any in their front stack, like an INFJ, and all of their videos are them doing NE stuff, right? Like, for example, me, I'm just getting on here and rambling, right? I'm just engaging in my NE and just sort of trying to make a point about something. And it gets very parenthetical. It could go off, into weird tangents because I'm trying to explain things that, I'm hoping that you have sort of a base knowledge of. But I'll explain it just to sort of build off the point. And like I'm doing right now, like just sort of searching for like, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next point I'm going to make in my argument here, or my story, or my rambling. Where am I going with this thing? It's all very inny, and I get that. And so it sort of leads to the question of, okay, well, if you're an INFJ, why are you engaging in all this any stuff? And so let me give you a little bit of a background to sort of, I guess, provide a little defense, or an argument, you know, in favor of the INFJ typing. So when I when I first started thinking about doing a channel, I mean, number one, it took me a long time. I mean, I had been sort of following this stuff and somewhat engaged in the online community for, probably close to 15, 20 years before I even thought of doing a channel. I would just sort of comment on other people's channels or watch their channels. And I was just sort of a consumer and not really try to put anything out there. But for whatever reason, I just decided, it might be fun to do a channel. It was probably like during COVID or something when everybody was really bored. I honestly forget what exactly motivated me, but for the longest time, I wanted to do videos that were probably similar to like what you see with Michael Pierce's videos. I forget his online name. I guess I think it's Michael Pierce, but those of you who have been around for a while, I'm sure know who he is. And he's an INFJ and he makes these videos about, the 16 types and, just provides a description of them and his observations. And, and he's a smart guy. He's very observational and he makes, good points. But his videos are kind of what you would expect from an INFJ. They're sort of, there's a point to them. It's more like watching like a PowerPoint slide, a pre-prepared lecture, rather than just having somebody just, you know, spout off their NE observations on everything. And and then there are other INFJ type people out there that do similar videos that, for the most part, they're kind of pre-prepared, some more than others, but you get some level of like, they sort of thought it through ahead of time and then they recorded it and, then there's sort of an extent to which they do post editing, right? Some of them might just record it and let it go. Others might, edit it to death and, try to get it as pristine as possible. And so I think there's a range, but I think the range is more on, we're not just going to riff and turn the computer record on and just start spouting off for 30 minutes straight. We're going to have some sort of structure and some sort of point to all of this. Um, and so that's probably more of your typical INFJ video. And so I think the commenter is making, a relevant and I think a good point of your videos just don't come across as INFJ, right? Because you're just sort of doing this any stuff. And I fully admit, I'm just doing this any stuff. But just because, I make my point doesn't necessarily mean that that's like front stack or dominant or, whatever you want to think of it. It's purely because when I started off, I wanted to do those sort of traditional INFJ type videos, but I ran into two problems repeatedly. Number one, I just kept running out of memory on my computer because I do a lot of music stuff. So I have all these huge music files. I finally figured out how to get a hard drive and work with that. But when I first started, like I'd record like a 15-minute video and it just, it wouldn't go. And there was also something weird about YouTube where I couldn't load a video that was longer than 15 minutes or something. I forget what the rule was, until I had a certain number of followers or something. And so, but if I went live, I could just go, for however long I wanted. And that was another reason. And then the third reason was when I started recording these videos, I'd get like 5 minutes in or 10 minutes in, and I'd say the wrong thing or use the wrong word or say something, that I didn't mean to say. And instead of like going back and editing or just, saying on the video, oops, I didn't mean to say that, I would just stop and start over again. And I would do this over and over again. And it just got to the point where like I just couldn't finish a video because I was so, obsessed with getting every little fine detail right. So it's almost the exact opposite of what everybody out there has come to learn and love about my channel, I suppose. Um, because, I basically told myself, look, you're never going to, put any videos out if you insist on having like the perfect video pre-recorded. And also I'm really, hate to say it, but I'm a pretty busy guy. I got a real job, I got real life family obligations, and there's only so much time I can spend making videos and stuff. And I'm not really trying to do it for the money or, views or clicks or anything. And so the sort of return on investment to me has to be pretty, it's going to be pretty minimal, right? I'm not looking to start, a huge channel with lots of viewers and lots of subscribers and having these very pristine, well, crafted videos. And so I get it. Most INFJs out there, they have very well crafted videos. And that is a very sort of INFJ style. I tried, but it just didn't work out that way. And so, and in the commenter and maybe other people's defense, maybe that is a sign that you're not really an INFJ, and I get it. But I think there's plenty of other evidence to point to it, which we'll talk about. Um, when I did decide to do the video, I was like, okay, there's other people out there who will just turn on the camera and just riff and just talk about whatever comes to mind on a particular point. And they do okay. And so I'm thinking like talking with famous people, which sort of runs the gamut. It runs back and forth. There's some stuff that's just pure, stream of consciousness, any type of videos, and then there's others that are like more defined. Like I'm going to talk about a very specific topic. A lot of the older videos. But there is sort of the opposite. You got an ENTP lead NE user that every once in a while will dip his toe into making NI type videos, right? The real, structured and to the point type of videos. But you can tell that his where his soft spot, his sweet spot is the NE stuff, right? I mean, he can just talk for hours. Um, and so I watched some of those sort of NE, just I think the first video I ever saw of his, he was like clipping a bonsai tree or something and just going on about the cognitive functions. And I was like, wow, this guy could just sit there clipping a bonsai tree without a care in the world and just go, and talk about the functions. And I certainly can't do that, right? But I thought it was kind of a cool thing. And I wish I could. I really wish I could just sit here and, clip a bonsai tree or do homework or do something constructive while just rambling on about it. But even though I come across as sort of rambling, when I make a video, I do come into the video with sort of 3 or 4 points usually that I want to make, that I want to touch on. It's just you're getting the rough draft of it. In a perfect world, I'd be able to write everything out, I'd be able to record everything, I'd be able to edit, condense to, a well structured and presented, video or essay or article. And in my real life, that is what I do, right? So when I teach classes and actually teach classes, I do have a PowerPoint slide. I do condense things down. as you would expect an INFJ would. When I write articles, I'm constantly condensing. I'm constantly trying to find, a way to get to the point without any sort of fluff or rambling. But that's all a process, right? I mean, you do have to sort of, even if you're an INFJ and NE isn't your lead function, you do have to sort of just NE everything onto the paper and then go from there, right? And condense down. So the other channel that I really liked was from an ENFP who was also a lead NE user. And that was what do they call it? NF Geeks with Professor Mike. And again, I don't know what happened to that channel. He just sort of abruptly stopped making videos for one reason or another. But again, he was also pretty engaging, um, and he had a couple of different types of formats. Number one, he would he would have sort of a theme that he wanted to talk about, like Christmas and NFs or Valentine's Day and NFs, or this movie and how, and he just wanted to give NFs a sort of space in the world, a place where NFs could talk about NF things, because he was very kind of patriarchal or paternalistic when it came to NFs. He liked to protect his NFs and thought, they don't get enough rep on YouTube or whatever his motivation was. But it was, but again, because he was this lead NE user, he could just sit there in his kitchen and just go on for 15, 20 minutes about a particular topic. And it was engaging, and and it was fun to follow. And I liked that format. I liked just being able to sit down and talk about something and not really having to come up with some snazzy, video that you get, on most YouTube channels for one reason or another. I don't know if it's because I just find it more authentic, or it's just easier for me to do rather than having to edit all this stuff and, take all the time doing that. I just hit record and start talking. But I think if you were to compare my videos to NF Geeks or talking with famous people, I think if you really sort of paid attention, dug in at a granular level, you'd realize that they are much smoother when doing that any stuff, right? There's not as much sort of filtering of going in the back of the mind and trying to figure out, okay, is this really what I want to say, or do I want to say it this way? Do I want to say it that way? They just sort of say it, and it just gets out there. There's not as much, parentheticals. There's not as much, talking around the point as opposed to talking straight to the point. And that's just to say that, they're probably way more comfortable and way more at ease just doing that any type riff than I am. If you look at it from the socionics perspective, it's the ignoring function. And so I'm sort of reaching into it, using it when I need it, and then sort of coming back and then reaching back into it and coming back. But point is, the larger, I think, point or lesson or thing that I like to point out to people doing the personality typing, is, just because you see somebody engaging in a particular function doesn't necessarily mean that that is their dominant function or their front stat function. We all engage in all of the functions. And I get it, maybe I'm a little bit better at doing the NE stuff than your typical INFJ, or not better, but just feel more comfortable doing it. Where maybe some INFJs wouldn't be caught dead, in this sort of format. Um, and I understand that, but that's probably by and large just a difference in my background. I've taught for years different types of classes. I've been a lawyer for a long time. It takes a lot of any sort of thinking on your feet to do that kind of stuff. And so I feel a little bit more comfortable with it than maybe your typical INFJ might. Um, okay, so let's see. Um, Going back to the comment here. Um, Video walks through. Okay, so again, the first one is sort of this: are you more on the NISE axis, which an INFJ would be, or are you more of a NESI axis type, which maybe an ISFJ or something like that might be. You walk through subjects A to Z, which is a very SI approach to be linear. Okay. I don't know if SI necessarily lends itself to being linear. I think that's more of like a TE type of thing, which of course I'm certainly not. And I fully admit I'm actually kind of surprised to that I got this comment about being linear, because I really don't think that I'm very linear, especially compared to maybe some other people out there. Like for example, if you want a good example of an SI user, watch Shade Starr's channel. He's the ISTJ, clearly SI front stack, and has this very just sort of pragmatic, here's what the systems are. Here is what this type is. Here's what this Enneagram type is, relying on the data and sort of building arguments or building observations off of the blocks of the data. Now, and he's not trying to dig into the meaning of things as much as I am. Most of my videos is like, okay, here's an observation about what happens, and here's why I believe that such and such happens. If you sort of look at this cognitive function or this cognitive function working with this cognitive function, that means why this is happening. Shane's videos don't really get into the why as much, or what does this mean, that an NI type user is. It's more about, I'm just going to get the structure and the facts out there, show you how they all sort of work together, give you some real world examples and some observations, and then that is how I'm imparting my knowledge to you, right? I'm not sitting there and saying, or Shane is not sitting there and saying, here's what it all means, or here's why this is happening. It just does. And that's a much more SI type of approach. Now, it's not to say that he couldn't do it. I think he definitely could. I mean, he's not, um, anti-polar by any respect. But I think it would take a little bit more prodding. Like it would have to. I think it would be more of like if he was talking to somebody and having a conversation, and somebody was able to pull that out of him or something. You might see it a little bit more, but it's not the approach. It's not his initial approach with this stuff, with this material, in the same way, in the way that it is with me. With me, it's about, I'm trying to explain the underlying mechanisms here and why an INFJ acts like this and an ISFJ acts like that. And how it all sort of arises or manifests itself out of these different functions. Now, it could be complete bullshit. I certainly agree with that, but that's the angle that I'm coming at. I'm not just coming and trying to spew off, a bunch of facts and say, okay, um, you take that for what it's worth and use it as you see appropriate, like a SJ would, an SI user would, front stack type SI user. Um, so where was I on this? Yeah, so they make the point that NI tends to come to the main point quickly, sort of like, here's the gist. And I agree with that to some extent. I think they don't necessarily come to it quickly. It's just that's all they really want out there. You know, I think there does take a lot of processing behind the scenes for an NI user to sort of narrow down and distill all that any stuff that's going on and filtering it through that filter or that funnel to get that NI nugget, right? That sort of universal truth that they're trying to pull from the data. I don't think it happens just automatically. I mean, maybe for some people it does, but for most, INFJs, INTJs, it's a process, and I can almost guarantee you, you know, when you're an INFJ, you spend pretty much your whole waking day distilling information down and trying to come up with some sort of explanation or meaning or catch all concept that sort of binds all these different ideas together, some sort of analogy or some sort of broad concept that's going to, build. I think of it as sort of set building, like set as in, the mathematical term. You're building these different sets based off of associations, and that's what you do all day, every day, unless you're distracted by work or something else that you have to be doing at the moment. Um, and so, but that's all behind the scene kind of stuff. And so when you're watching these videos, again, I get it. You're watching my sort of any sort of circle around it, and and try to grab different sort of pieces that I'm going to piece together, but you're getting a rough draft of it. And like I said before, even before I do these videos, I will spend a pretty considerable amount of time, trying to come up with three or four nuggets, trying to come up with three or four NI types of observations. It's just that you're getting the rough draft of me building that argument, right? And again, because I'm a lawyer, I'm just sort of trained to have to sort of build arguments, and try to come at it from all angles so that it, and prepare myself for any attack, right? Like pre-prepare for attack. So you're looking at it from all these different angles. You're trying to build it up and make your case. And it probably does come across as a little bit more just meandering and and coming and talking about all these sort of semi-related topics rather than just getting to the point. Because all I did was just say the point or the concept or the observation or the theory that I'm trying to make, and I just said that, and I didn't build it up or try to, sort of walk you through the argument, then I'm leaving myself open to somebody just saying, you know, "That's bullshit. I don't agree with you at all." And then you have to backtrack and then try to explain to them, but you're already behind the 8 ball because you didn't show them from the get-go how you got from point A to point B to point C, etcetera. Um, Now again, you're getting sort of the rough draft of it, right? It would be great if I could write it all out, give you a PowerPoint slide and set, and walk you through the steps. I would love to be able to do that, but it's just the reality of my situation is it's hard. And I also think that there is a benefit of just sort of, rambling. And sort of coming up with the point and sort of being transparent about it, I guess. Um, okay. On top of that, you have SFJ facial proportions, in my impression at least. Well, hopefully that's a good thing. I don't know. I guess I look like an SFJ, ISFJ. I'll take it. I don't have any problems with ISFJs or how they look. Now, I don't know how much stock I put in, whether or not your physical features reflect your type. I get it. I get the argument that, Disney cartoons tend to resonate with even very young children when it comes to personalities and features. I think some of that is sort of racially based, but I get it. I mean, I think there's something there that different features can lead to different personalities, but I also don't know if we know exactly what is what. I mean, I'm very Irish. I'm very Irish looking, and I always think of Irish people as like the quintessential INFJs. The little, very mystic, but very like people oriented. Um, and so, take that for what it's worth. Or INFJs. I don't know if I said that, but anyways, but that's fine. And I get that your entire argument does not hinge on that. So we'll just leave it at that. Um, something- okay, so then he goes on to sort of you know, talk about or kind of halfway apologizing or just being diplomatic, and but making the point that, well, if you get your own type wrong, then can we really trust your observations on other types? And I get that as a general point, but I disagree that I've got my type wrong. In fact, I didn't come up with my type. I went to the one place that I think is a reliable, uh, and that's the talking with famous people test that Eric does. And I went into that test not thinking I was an INFJ at all. I thought I was an INTJ. I spent years thinking I was an INTJ, maybe an ENTJ. Um, but I didn't really understand Eric's sort of model. I didn't really know it. I just knew his channel well enough to know that I wanted to do a typing session. But then after I did the typing session, I watched, a ton more videos and sort of started understanding his model and understanding how it ties very well and very closely to the brain data that I studied when I was in undergrad and graduate school in the psych program that I was in. And it just the way it's about the computation, it's about what type of information is being computed, or processed, or you're focusing attention on one type of information, and not so much about sort of the description of what TI versus TE. TE is about metrics and TI is about subjectivity or whatever the hell they say. It really is different types of information that's being processed and different types of processing functionality that's going on underneath. So so I came out of that, you know, typing session like, never really thought of myself as an INFJ. Seems a little weird. I had a good friend who he and I would talk about MBTI stuff all the time, and we both thought we were INTJs. We thought every lawyer in the world was an INTJ. Um, and I came back, I was like, I did this typing session and came out as INFJ, and it just actually makes so much more sense because if you think of TI being third slot and blah 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 blah, and he's just like, oh, you're an NF. I can't talk to you anymore. Um, and so then I really started digging into it, and shortly, then a few years later, after digging into it and getting really comfortable, is when I came up with the channel. Now, of course, it's all sort of tongue in cheek because at least when I came up with the channel, every INFJ, every channel out there was an INFJ, right? I think it sort of shifted into everybody now is an INFP, but at the time, everybody was an INFJ. So here's another one of these majestic INFJs, that you only, that's less than 1% of the population, all that kind of stuff. And I totally understood that I was going to be seen as just another one of these people who thinks that they're an INFJ, but really, is an ISFJ or something else. And so that's kind of the little joke behind the name of the channel. But I do sincerely think that, that I'm an INFJ. But all that being said, I do also appreciate or understand the fact that really the only thing you can really test for, um, in really any of these personality schemes, is the polar function, because it's the only thing that you're really falsifying. So from like a scientific theory, Karl Popper, how do we know what we know kind of position, the the only thing you could really test for is the polar function, because you're sort of negating the null hypothesis in statistical terms, right? Everything else is just sort of, building evidence for evidence sake, on all the other functions, all the other slots, right? So, because of that, I fully admit the only thing that we could really know, at least from my typing session, is that I came out as TE polar. And when I got the TE polar test, I mean, I fell off like that was the only test, in the whole, session, that I just felt like fell off a cliff and went underwater. Like I had no idea, even when I was being asked to do, or like how to respond to that question. And and whatever it is, whether it's describing an MBTI personality type or something completely different, when you watch somebody who's TE polar, on these testing sessions, you see it, or at least I see it, because I remember, going through that experience. I get it. That's a very SI thing, but okay. Um, and so when you see an ISFJ or an INFJ go through that TE polar experience where they just don't even know how to respond to the question, the TE question, you know, okay, that's TE polar. And so it's pretty confident that about being TE polar, but it does leave open the possibility of being an ISFJ. I fully admit that. So really the question then comes down to, are you an SI dominant or NI dominant? And really the only thing that I can, well, there's several points I could make, but I think the most compelling is that I just don't do lead SI stuff. I just don't. Uh, you know, um, Lead SI types, your ISFJ, ISTJ, they are the tell me about your day storytellers, and they will tell you about their day. They will, give you detail after detail after detail. I don't do that. Even if I wanted to do that, I couldn't do it. And when you see it in an ISFJ, in an IS or an ISTJ, and I've been surrounded by ISFJs and ISTJs all my life. I work with a lot of them, and I have a lot of family members that I think were one or the other, and they will just run with the story about their day. And because theoretically I'm INFJ, I'm good at listening to it. And so I'm sort of this like natural recipient, I guess, of the ISTJ or ISFJ stories. ESTJs and ESFJs will also do it, um, but it's the ISTJs and the ISFJs where they really know you and they feel like they can open up to you, or they just go on. And that's certainly something I don't do. And I also, the SI stuff, like I could sit in uncomfortable chairs and be uncomfortable and be in the car for like 10 hours and not even know it. I can go a day, or half a day or something without eating and not even realizing it. My sleep schedule's all over the place. I just don't do that SI stuff that lead SI people do to sort of make sure that their body is okay and make sure that they are, as comfortable as possible in their homeostasis. That's also a very SI thing, and I just don't do it. And so, you know, and I wouldn't have a problem with being an ISFJ. ISFJs are great. So, it's not like I'm trying to run away, and say there's no way I'm going to be an ISFJ. I just don't think I am. But I do understand where the commenter is coming from, especially if like the only information you have about me is from this channel, and all you do is watch me do NE stuff, right? And sort of unpack my NE bags, trying to make my NI points throughout the video. And so again, sort of fair warning when you get into the typing stuff, it's all a Rorschach test, and I get it. We all have archetypes about what we think an INFJ should be acting like, or what an ISFJ does act like. And every once in a while, you run into somebody who's just sort of acting more like a different archetype, a different type, than they claim to be. But you have to sort of look past that, and you have to sort of ask yourself, okay, are they in a situation where they have to use this function that they normally otherwise wouldn't be using? And if so, how comfortable are they using it? Is it smooth or is it sort of, jagged or uh, jumpy? So just things to think about. Maybe I'll start doing some more INFJ polished videos. But again, I just kind of like this format. And I also want to do more, or do videos, talking to other people. And I think if you saw me interacting with other people, you might get more of an INFJ vibe. Because frankly, outside of these videos, like in real life, if you wanted to see how I really act, it's just, I just sit there watching other people. And then every once in a while I'll chime in with some smart ass comment or some pithy observation, and then just go back to my little hole. That's the real INFJ. And so watching an INFJ sort of just put their NE mind stuff out there does sort of belie, whether, or just sort of make you question, like, is this person really an INFJ or not? Okay, and so maybe I'll, if I could find some people to do some, interactive type of videos, you know, one or two or three people talking about various things. Again, I might come, you might start seeing more of the INFJ vibe. They tend to sort of defer and just and then they'll chime in with an observation, and then they'll go back into their shell. But again, it sort of depends on who the other person is. You need somebody who's got that NE that can just carry the conversation. Okay, I think that's about it. I appreciate you if you've gotten this far. I appreciate you making it through the video. I think there are some important points to get out of the comment, but rest assured, I'm pretty confident about the INFJ thing. But if there's something that I could tell you to change your mind, let me know what it is. Something that I could say that would convince you. Let me know. And I'd like to be able to say that there's something you could tell me to convince me that I'm wrong, but unfortunately it's really just the TE polar thing, that I'm polar on a different area. So maybe you can convince me on that. But if you think of an ISFJ, we're kind of stuck, right? Because both are TE polar. All right, I think that's about it. Again, thanks for hanging in there. Talk to you next time.